So, what is a man child and what is a man? There's a big difference between the two. A man child is a child that has reached its puberty point and is now transitioning into becoming a full adult. So they're not a child and they're not an adult and they're no longer a teen. So they're still in that little transition phase that hasn't occurred yet to being a full-fledged adult. And so you want to define what a man is, but you can check that out in another video that I've done. But here I will define everything that a man child is, and it's still pretty much everything that a child is, and not really a man. So a man child has no direction. Just like any other child, they are free of direction. They can do whatever they want, and they are free to go wherever they need to, whenever they want to. Not to say a man can't do that. Usually a man has a direction and knows where he's going, versus a child is just free of wonder. They are emotionally unstable. They are not in control of their emotions. If they feel like crying on the spot, they will cry on the spot. If they are happy, they will gladly smile on the spot. If they are angry, they tend to show it right then and there, and they are not able to gain any sort of overview and control of their emotional states, and know how to control that better. They live in the pleasure rather than the stressful hard work. So they rather be in comfort rather than uncomfort. And a man knows that in the uncomfort is where you really grow, rather than being in the comfortable. Because when you're uncomfortable, you're usually going into a treachery that's fearful or stressful, and that's usually where you grow. Such as, like, an example would be skydiving. If you're fearful of skydiving and you want to grow, well, you're gonna have to become uncomfortable rather than staying at home on the couch being comfortable. Usually nothing is done being in the comfortable, such as like sleeping in or staying on your couch watching Netflix. You're not out there actively working or progressing towards a goal. Whereas if you're trying to start a business, you're usually in the uncomfortable a lot of the times, because every single day something new happens, something occurs that you're gonna have to overcome, and that is what a man child does not want. He would rather live in the pleasure all the time. They are still dependent rather than becoming independent. They want someone to take care after them, and the dependency comes more from the next case, which is they are still in comfort of their mother. So now we're gonna come into the story here, because I can't talk about that unless we start getting into the story time. So the story of the man-childs. I'm gonna go with the nuclear family of having a father and a mother to speak about this, and I'm gonna talk about the mother's role, or what the mother does raising a boy. When they're raising a boy, the mother is one who usually tends to care for them more than the father. Usually, this is not always the case, but I'm gonna say for this purpose, I'm gonna say the mother is the one that tends for the kid and is always there. And so as the boy is growing, he unconsciously gets an attachment to the mother that he might not notice. And so usually that's where the dependency comes from. So when a boy comes home, he usually knows that he can go to his mother to comfort him, to be there for him, which is not always the case, but this is one example that I'm gonna be using for this story. Versus what the father does is usually the father's away and he's out gathering resources and creating shelter, such as, so he's working, making money so he can provide for the family. So those are the two differences between the mother and the father. And so the father must presently show how to live in this world and how to work and how to strive in adversity. So that's what a man child or a boy needs from his father. He needs his father to be there for him emotionally and presently. The boy needs to be able to see how his father handles life, how he walks in all his life, how he does his work, how he overcomes problems, how he holds himself, how he moves around through society, how he gathers resources, and how he's able to provide food and all this. A man-child or a boy need to see this from his father in order to have an example and have or some sort of inspiration, someone to look up to want to see to be that. And that's what a man-child needs. They need a father figure role, and that is not something that a mother can provide, given that her role is to comfort and be there for the children, taking care of them and stuff. An absent father can cause a child to lean into the mother more, causing mother to overcare for a child. So if a father isn't there, a child might start getting more to his mother, start growing more of an attachment to her, causing the mother to take on another role that was not for her, which is a father figure role. And now the child will become over dependent on the mother, not knowing subconsciously that he's become an over dependent needing person rather than an independent person. So in order for a man child to grow into a man, he needs to learn how to become independent. He's got to want to become independent. If he ever loses his mother, he will start to seek dependency or comfort in other things, and usually this can lead to drugs. It can lead to other types of women that he will not be able to. He will lead to other women to get to another woman. He will, how do I say it? He will get into a relationship with another woman seeking comfort rather than being a male figure role for his upcoming child that he will have if he has one, or even being there for his relationship spouse and being able to provide resources and going out to the uncomfortable to bring that in for her. Some tribes would have initiations where they would separate the child from the mother and be thrown into the darkness to kill their adolescence. So they would grab the child. Some tribes would grab their child from the nighttime when they were a man child, and they would take them to the darkness. And the darkness is one where you have a lot of fear, right? Because you're scared of the dark. And so you're going to have to be able to overcome that as you're growing up and becoming a man. I know when I was a young kid, I used to be scared of sleeping alone out in the living room by myself because it was dark. I was so used to sleeping with my parents. And so once you have that separation of you're going to sleep by yourself, I remember that's something that I had to overcome to grow. I had to be in the uncomfort. And so tribes would take the child and throw him in a cave. And then from the cave, they would come out. And then they would see all males coming in a tribe, and the child would see it. This is all males, so the child is a man, and he would hear everything the tribes do as a man and what they have to do every single day. And then from there, they would throw the child out into the wilderness and wait for him to survive to see if he can come back to where they were staying at. And so this is another good example of how like a child needs to leave home so they can grow and so they can become their own person and learn how to survive in the world. Because once you don't have your mother or your father, both of them, it becomes a thing of like, all right, how am I going to survive? If you're over the age of 18 living in the United States, it's kind of like you're on your own at that point. The government doesn't care for you as much, and you're going to have to learn how to do stuff. If you have no family, no like cousins, relatives, or friends that are out there, you're going to have to learn how to survive on your own. And if you are so used to being in comfort of your mother, and out of a sudden, out of the blue, this just suddenly happens that your parents vanish, you're going to be in for quite a shock. So you're going to have to voluntarily go out there and want to do that. A child who is not allowed to be free, to make mistakes, to fall down, or to stand up by himself will lose the chance to become a full-fledged adult, because they're not going to want to seek out uncomfortable situations where, let's say, there's a moment where you just keep falling down, and at a certain point you can't have someone lift you up. You got to learn how to pick yourself back up, because there's going to be moments where someone's not going to be there and you're going to have to learn how to do it on your own. At some point when a kid's riding a bike, you take off the training wheels and they're going to fall, and it's going to have to take some courage to get back on the bike by yourself as you're growing to learn how to do that. You got to learn how to make mistakes. Every mistake is a blessing because you can learn something. So if I'm cooking and I burn my hand on the grill, I know not to touch that grill ever again. A person who has not yet become a full-fledged adult or a man is going to easily go into the pleasures of life, such as oversleeping and not wanting a battle in life, not wanting to take on the challenges needed to create some meaning or some life that you want, because you're just going to want to sleep in and want to overeat, just have over sensual pleasure rather than non-pleasure, where you're in a stressful situation battling to create something. A good example is you will stay Peter Pan and live in an imaginary world. Peter Pan from I believe the Peter Pan movie, right? That's what it's called, the Peter Pan movie, right? That sounds off, but okay. Anyways, Peter Pan, he lives in Neverland, right, which is an imaginary world, and kids come from the real world, and they visit him, and then they leave, but he stays in his world right there and never goes into the real world. I guess so. So a question that pops up is, what is the real world, right? I would say the reality of having to work and create meaning daily. So in the real world, you have to work all the time. Take it back to the old days, back when men had to go out to the wild to cut trees, to create a fire, go hunt. You had to kill a reindeer, you had to kill a deer, elk, and then skin it. And you're working all the time to survive, and you have to do this daily to eat. But now we have it a little easier because we have produce coming in at the grocery markets. We don't have to build houses. Houses are built, so now it's all about just working, getting money, and doing that. And so in the real world now, in these times, you're going to have to work to do something, to to buy shelter, to buy food, to provide for a family if you ever have one, to provide for yourself in a sense, rather than having someone else provide for you. So that's what I would say the real world is. A man-child never notices that his pleasures are an escape from the real world of the reality of knowing you have to work. And it's knowing you have to work. It's at the point where you're like, you don't think about it, but you know you have to work. And I'm not sure if a man-child ever is forced to become a man, because at some point you become old, such as like in your late 30s, and you have no one to take care of you, so you're forced to do something like that. You're kind of put into that situation. Time catches up to you, and you have to make something of yourself. So now, how to overcome it? The only way that I know to overcome it is you have to actively choose what you want to do to work. You have to choose a sacrifice that you want to get into, that you want to do. So let's say rather than getting thrown into a certain job at a younger age, you actively choose, like, okay, I want to do welding because it's more attractive than mechanics, because am actively more engaged into it. So you're not just thrown into it. So you're choosing your poison. You're choosing your sacrifice of what you want to do for the rest, not for the rest of your life, but for the time being where you're gonna have to work. So you start creating something for yourself. You gotta embrace the struggle. It's not easy doing that at first. You just gotta wake up every single day and know you're getting it. You gotta know someone else is getting it. You gotta know you're not the only one out there that feels like they're struggling. Not the only one that wakes up and is like, shit, here we go again, like another day. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to sleep in. Just know there are other people out there doing the same thing. And it's also so you can stand yourself. You gotta lift the load. So in order to become a man and not feel worthless about yourself, you gotta lift the load. Versus a child follows you, right? And your father lifts the load. He's carrying the rocks, he's carrying the logs, and the child is there just wandering, right? So now you gotta lift that load and move it to another spot where you need to cut down the wood, put it to the fire, care for the family. And this helps because as you're carrying more loads, you create more meaning in yourself, knowing like, even if I was a worthless child, now I'm carrying this much load, providing for you, giving you this, and not to say like, oh, I'm giving you this, but it's more like, all right, I'm helping someone, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and now you're actively creating something, and you feel a sense of pride, you feel a sense of meaning, and you're like, all right, I feel better about myself. And so that is a man-child and how to overcome it.